Welcome to Horror Makes Us Happy, the podcast where we ask the question, what is it about horror that makes us happy? Your hosts are Steve Becker and myself, Chris Whitman, and you can find out more about us at our website, horrormakesushappy.com. Before we get started, this is the trigger warning. This is a horror podcast, so we're going to be talking about horror things, which could involve such sensitive subjects such as child abuse, the R word, the F word. There may be sensitive subjects here because we talk about horror stuff, and if that's not your cup of tea, what the hell are you doing here?
Go away, come back later.
Yeah, show's over. Ferris Bueller, in the room, all that stuff. But if that is your cup of tea, listen to us talk about horror stuff. And Steve, what do we have coming up?
Oh, well, we're down to like 8 people on the guest list now, so it's getting tighter. But
is it actually quantifiable now? It's no longer just like, yeah, we have a lot.
Yeah, slowly chipping away at it. I might actually have to start getting back to inviting people again. Still doing listen parties on Sundays at 7 p.m. And then at 9 p.m. Chris is doing his drawing parties where he live streams himself working on his webcomic piecesofflesh.com. Also got my book, A Guide to the Recovery Toolbox, on Amazon and all other places that you can get books. But today we are talking to Richard Thomas, author of Disintegration, Breaker, and Spontaneous Human Combustion. Welcome.
Thanks. Thanks for having me, guys. I'm happy to be here to talk about horror. So I think I'm in the right place.
Yes.
Yes, you are.
Before we get into the meat of the interview, you want to let us know what you're currently working on?
Yeah, sure. So I'm always writing short fiction. I have some stories coming out this year. One I'm pretty excited about. It's not horror, but it's kind of horror adjacent. I finally got a story into a magazine called Lightspeed, which is science fiction and horror. So our science fiction I've been trying to get in there for a very long time. Edited by John Joseph Adams. And then I think the big thing I've been working on is my 4th novel, Incarnate, comes out on September 10th. It's a Arctic horror sin eater book, and I'm really excited about it. We got a good review on Kirkus, getting some great blurbs from people like Jonathan Mayberry and Gwendolyn Kist and Laird Barron, and I'm just really excited about it. I think some of my best work to date, so I'm really happy for that to come out.
Cool. We will put together a bio page for you and link to whatever it is that you want us to link to. So anybody who wants to find that stuff will be able to find it by coming to our webpage and then just going to the episodes page and finding you on there.
Awesome.
It's been a little while since we talked to schedule this, and I know that I gave you a handout at StokerCon, but just to recap, basically what we do is we talk to you about your love of the genre from childhood through adulthood, and then at the end, if any recurring themes have been cropping up, we talk about what those might be and how those intersect with the horror genre and what have you. So starting with childhood, what are some of your earliest memories of scary things?
Oh boy, it's a good question. Somebody said Gen X, one of the reasons we're all damaged, that we all read a Stephen King book way too early. I think for me, it was reading The Shining as a freshman in high school. I always loved to read. I always loved to write, going back to grade school. But I can remember The Shining really scaring the crap out of me and just laying in bed and being like freaked out by it. And I think my love of King early on is what drove a lot of my horror reading. I think I read a lot of his work. I read a lot of Dean Koontz, some of his early stuff. So I think that's one thing I remember. And then probably just... I remember seeing all the classic films that came out at the time, you know, all the early first versions of like Halloween and Nightmare on Elm Street and Friday the 13th. And then I think it's just probably whatever random moments of death we all had when we were young. I do kind of have this weird origin story. I can tell you that when I was a young Boy Scout, hiking downtown in St. Louis by the St. Louis Arch, we were like, 10 or 15 of us with our Scoutmasters and whatnot hiking downtown. And we saw a plane fly over the arch, and you're not supposed to fly over the plane. It was like a little small, like Piper Twin Cub or something. And a guy jumped out and parachuted out of the plane. And so we're walking down by the Mississippi River, and I look up and I'm like, oh my God, look at that. And I'm like, guy's going to land on the arch. And sure enough, he floats down and lands on the arch. So we're watching the whole thing transpire. And then we look up and see him sliding down the leg of the arch.
Yeah.
Do you remember hearing about this?
No, but I can imagine.
Yeah, it was in all the papers. It was a big deal.
Good.
So I slid down the leg of the arch, hit the ground, splat, right? His family was there filming it. I see his wife run up to him, holding his head. He's luckily wearing like a jumpsuit, so it kind of kept him contained. There weren't like body parts everywhere. But I remember when we saw him coming down, my scoutmaster, who used to be in like the FBI or CIA or something, he's like, "Come on, kids, we can save him." He's like, run up these 75 steps. He's like, "Well, we're gonna lock arms," and like, I don't know what he was. It would have just ended up killing 4 more people, idiot. But anyway, I was one of the kids who got over the top stair in time to see him hit and bounce like 10 feet in the air. Ooh. So I guess what happened was that they had this planned. His wife and family were filming this. He was going to float down, land on the arch, jump away from it into the space away from the leg, pull his reserve, and then float down to the ground. So he lands on top of the arch. The minute he lands, a crosswind pushes him to the right, over, down the metal, and he got the friction of him sliding down the metal leg of the arch. He couldn't separate from the leg, so he pulled his reserve and it got tangled up in his main chute, and he was a goner. There's nothing he could do. So I think the visual that stays with me the most, aside from just the whole event, was as wide as the leg of the arch is. I don't know, 55 feet or something. There was a sheen of blood as wide as the leg could go, and I just never seen that much blood before. I mean, picture like that. I come back to The Shining, the elevator scene in The Shining, but not that kind of volume, but just like a placid lake of just so much blood. And some of the kids were throwing up, and it's just one of those things that, as I'm telling it to you right now, I'm back there again. I can see it all clearly, and so I think when people ask me what got you into writing horror, is there a seminal event? I think that's one of the things that fascinated me, horrified me, made me curious about, the human body and life and death and all that kind of stuff. And so I think pairing that with like my early love of King, which I basically have read everything he's written, and, always having a hunger to read and write from grade school to high school to college and beyond, is what brings me to horror.
It's a good first start. It's a good first start.
Yeah. I mean, I think we've all probably witnessed death in one form or another, whether it's just going to a funeral, being a grandparent, right, or somebody in a casket that's weird when you're like, oh, they're not really there, but they're there in your memories, or, I had some kids in high school died in a car accident. I had a friend in college who borrowed my fake ID, went down to the bars and fell over a railing and drowned in a foot of water. Like, we all have these weird things that happen around us or near us or in our community. And, obviously, we try to avoid death, but it's there, right? Without the dark, can we truly appreciate the light?
Yeah, it is very I Ching of you.
Yeah. So this incident at the Arch, how old were you when that happened?
Well, I wasn't in high school yet, so I had to be probably 12 or 13. I want to say junior high.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I think you said you were in high school already when you read Stephen King.
Yeah. I think that was my early entry into horror. I read a lot of, when I was young, I read, whatever I get my hands on. So, I would maybe read all my grandma's Agatha Christie books. I would read, mystery crime thrillers, and then it started to ease my way into horror. There wasn't as much, quote, kids horror, unquote, that I can remember. I don't remember even like young adult being a genre. Like you had kids and then you had adults, and there was like nothing in between.
Right.
But I've always been pretty, I've done pretty well in my English classes and my writing classes, so I've been drawn to books that are probably a little beyond my level. And so I think I just dipped into King like many of us did, and that kind of opened the door to a lot of other writers.
Yeah. So when you said there wasn't much in the childhood section, it all depends on what your, I'm going to say this, your perspective, I guess, because, for example, when I was a kid, I remember watching Secret of Nim. I remember reading Edgar Allan Poe, but it wasn't on the same level, obviously, as King and Kuntz.
Right.
And depending on what you, how can I say this? Depending on how you reacted to other things that maybe weren't necessarily horror, like people talk about Watership Down, which was a Disney cartoon.
Yeah, exactly. That's a great one too. I remember, I don't know how old I was when I read the book, probably older than when I watched the cartoon.
You read the book?
Yeah. Great book. Yeah.
Is it just as descriptive as the film?
Yeah. There's a lot of detail, the hierarchy of how the rabbits, how their world works, but I think it's fascinating. But I like the book and the movie, but the movie is definitely one of those childhood movies that you feel like you're scarred. I don't know if you guys remember like early Disney, but I remember being really, really young and being like, when Bambi's mom died in the fire, like that freaking me out. I remember, was it Snow White, the one that had the dragon and the witch?
Maleficent?
Was it Snow White, or maybe Sleeping Beauty? Maybe
Sleeping Beauty. That was it.
Yeah. I might be I don't know how old you guys. I'm a little older. I'm 56, so I'm may not be quite the same generation, but
the unintentional creepiness of early animations like Disney films like that, like just the way that the villain is overemphasized in the animation, and it's naturally creepy.
Right. Well, and I think the idea when we were that really young, if you were, probably less than around 10 or younger, when you're watching Bambi first time, the idea that the mother could die was not a concept. I think I was like, that can happen. Mom can die,
Yeah.
I also remember watching Old Yeller and having to shoot the dog. And remember that scene being terrifying. Was it Michael Landon, maybe? God, yeah, that's old.
Yeah.
Was Michael Landon in Old Yeller?
Sounds about right. It's been a long time since I've seen that movie.
Well, you're unearthing all these childhood memories of trauma.
That's what we do here.
Yes.
Right. You got the trauma.
Thank you. Send me a bill.
Yes. Yeah. Actually, as a matter of fact, I was going to mention that. So, like, we do separate early childhood from teenage years, and so when you had started talking about, in high school, I was actually going to try to, wind the clock back a little further and see what came up, because some guests have reported there was like a dividing line where prior to a certain event, they were scared by horror, and then after the dividing line, it became an enjoyment to them. Right. And so, but for some guests, that didn't happen until high school or college. So, trying to figure out where that line was for you is still part of, something that we would ask about.
Yeah, no, that's a great question, because I think you're right. I think all that stuff I mentioned that's pre Stephen King were I wouldn't say they weren't things that I sought out, or I not that I didn't enjoy them.
Yeah,
I think I was just learning to deal with strong emotions.
You didn't seek them out because of it being horror.
Right. I think when I started to read, I always was a fan of writing, going back to, like I said, 5th grade, when I won the title for most books read male in our class, that I would read anything. I mean, when I was in 5th grade, I remember reading Judy Blume, and because all the girls were reading it, and I was curious about girls, and all the mystery, Nancy Drew and the Hardy Boys, like anything I can get my hands on. But I definitely think it was probably somehow when I got into Stephen King. And I don't know if my grandma had a book, or I don't know how I got, because my mom was not a fan of King.
Reader's Digest.
Yeah, just because whatever you think about Stephen King, some people think he overwrites. I think he's a great storyteller. And I think that alone is what got me excited about his work, that you're reading early works of his and you're going, oh my God, you can go into the horror, but there's a great story here. And the horror is not everything. And it's not just a jump scare in a movie. It's a developed character that puts you in a situation where there's tension and there's stakes, and you're rooting for somebody to make it or not make it. You're rooting against a bad guy. That it's a more complex journey that I think a lot of us may not have had, too many experiences at the age of 15 of life and death and good and bad and love and heartbreak, that we're still experiencing a lot of these things for the first time. There's a loss of innocence at some point, I think, in our childhood, at which point you realize that the world's a pretty violent place, right? I write a lot of maximalist fiction. I lean into the new weird. And so I've had stories set in nature where I love nature, and I'm a Eagle Scout, loved hiking and camping and being in the outdoors, but you often would run across things where nature doesn't really care. Nature's going to eat you if it's hungry and it's bigger than you. I can remember being on my honeymoon in Hawaii with my wife and standing there watching the waves come in and just having a moment of kind of vertigo, disorientation, where I realized, oh my God, I'm on an island. And as the waves are kind of undulating and coming in and back, going back, just realizing how big and deep and dark and cold it was, and how if it really wanted to, it could just kind of wash over the whole island. I just felt so small. Like I almost fell over backwards looking at the waves coming in, and just that sense of, it's kind of almost leaning into like the idea of cosmic horror, of it being futile to push back against something that it's way bigger than you. You're not going to survive it.
Right. Sublime.
Yeah.
Did you have any scary dreams as a child, or any reoccurring dreams?
Not that I can remember as a child, no.
Right.
Yeah, I have some weird stuff I can tell you later as an adult, but I've seen a lot of weird things in my time. But
all right, we'll get to that. Was there ever a time in your childhood when you actually were terrified of something in real life?
I remember our neighbors had these really big dogs, and we would walk between one neighbor and the other. There was a fence, and like one dog was like a Saint Bernard, like huge, must have been over 200 pounds, and the other was like a Great Pyrenees, or maybe 100 pounds. They were big. They were as big as a human. I just remember one day they got out and they were in the neighborhood, and it was like you could see the dog right around the neighborhood, and it was like you had to get home. And if you like you're running across the yard watching the dog, worried if it got to you that we thought it would attack and kill you, right? So there was this built-in fear combined with curiosity of this great beast that you were close to. And I knew them, and it was like as long as they're behind the fence, and I'd walk by and I'd be like, they'd bark at everybody, but once they sniffed you, they'd lick you, and they'd be like, your pal. But you're like, once you got rid of the fence, you're like, I feel like all the rules go out the window. Like I think they're going to take a bite of me because they're curious and hungry, or just mean or whatever.
It's a good thing you hadn't started reading King.
Yeah, right.
Right. Yeah. No Cujo yet, right?
St. Bernards and all.
Yeah. They're big dogs.
Yep. Flipping that question around, was there a time in your childhood when you felt completely calm or safe or at bliss?
I think as a young boy, it's pre-high school, that we go to scout camp in the summer. And if you were initiated into Order of the Arrow, they'd take you out into the woods and with your sleeping bag and whatever, and they'd just leave you in the woods. And you had no idea where camp was. And then in the morning, the sun would come up and you'd be like, oh, camp's like 20 feet over there. But in the night, you were terrified. And I can remember the ceremony. A whole camp would come together. Your camp for a week, and the whole camp must have been hundreds of students, of scouts. We'd be lined up around the lake. And they would it was this great ceremony, this huge bonfire. And I've always been a pyromaniac. I love fire. And one of the scouts was dressed up like an Indian. And he was just like wearing a loincloth and I think a head thing. And he would go running around the lake barefoot. And it was in the dark, and it was really intense. And so you're all lined up. You don't talk. Your arms are at your side. You're facing forward. And then he would come up and you would get tapped out. I can remember him running, and they would basically punch you in the chest and knock you over backwards, where scoutmasters would grab you and drag you off into the woods, right? And then you wouldn't see the scout who got tapped out until the next day. You wouldn't know all the things that happened until it happened to you. You just know that if you were up for it, you're supposed to wrap up your bedroll, put it on your bed, and we'd come back to camp, and 3 of our scouts would be gone. And so it was this whole weird thing of not necessarily being fearful of the Indian, but just the ceremony had this ritual sense to it.
Yeah.
And I remember when I got tapped out, when they hit you, they don't really punch you. They cup their hand. So it sounds much louder and worse than it is. But I just remember him tapping me out. And I was a tall, skinny kid. I mean, I was pretty skinny. Just knocking me over backwards. As I found out later, there would be a guy kneeling or on all fours behind you, so that you tumble over them. Another scout, because later, once I was in OA, I would then be on the backside to help pull people into the initiation, right? The other scout would grab you and drag you over him back into the woods, and then into the bushes, where there's a whole second trail hidden in the woods, where they would walk everybody back to camp and then walk you out. And the ceremonies were just so cool. So I think it's this weird pairing of being, for me in my childhood, being fearful of certain things, and then really getting deep into them and finding out there's more there than fear, and kind of understanding the complexity and nuance of the experience. To go from being scared of it to being tapped in, to being to have pride of being, to be a part of this, to then later being the one who helps the initiation, who helps bring other people into the fold, and who later I came back and taught at the scout camp. I was junior leadership training camp kind of scout thing. And I think that's a lot of my childhood, was things that I was afraid of, and then facing them head on, or being forced into them, or random events. And then coming out the other side with more curiosity, I think, and interest in kind of the human condition and the human experience than fear and trauma. Although I think we all probably have some trauma from our childhood. I mean, I grew up in a generation where corporal punishment was the norm, so my dad would take a belt to my butt if I was bad. And, that's the way it was in, I think, all my friends' houses back then in the 70s.
A bit tangential here, but are you familiar with the works of Joseph Campbell?
Yeah.
Most people are familiar with him from The Hero with 1,000 Faces, but he's also done a lot of other work, and some of that having to do with initiation ceremonies and things like that. Are you familiar with his work on that stuff?
A little bit, yeah.
Okay. Well, I was just going to bring that up as being very, how can I say this? Open my eyes to a lot of things that I had not thought of in terms of, the psychology of, like what you said about being afraid of something and then either facing it or being forced into it, and then the psychology of going through that experience and then coming out the other side.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I've always been pretty curious and lived a bit of a bohemian lifestyle and consider myself a bit of a Renaissance man. So I think I've always been open to experiences. And then, sometimes you come out the other side and like, okay, that was good. That was, but I don't want to do that again. And other things you're like, oh, that was really cool. I definitely want to do that again and go deeper, right? So
right.
Depends on what it is, right?
Yeah. Got another pair of questions here.
Sure.
So starting with the negative, so we can end on the positive. Do you remember the first person you hurt?
Hurt. My younger brother, he was 3 years younger than me. I just remember wrestling with him. I just remember punching him really hard in the back. And I just remember him kind of like, I think he was on the ground. We were wrestling around. I just remember the look on his face when he like arched his back and he was like, he made like a quiet scream, like you're making a face, but no noise is coming out. And then he just ran up to his room. And I think that was one of the first times that I was like, oh shit, like I think I really hurt him. And like, because he was tough and strong and we were both pretty equal, I just didn't, the idea that I would actually hurt him, I didn't think it was possible,
Right.
I remember, like emotionally, I can remember dating a girl in high school and she and I got along really well. We were in theater together and stuff and she was really fun. But I just remember it being like, I don't know, things were going the way I wanted it to. And I wanted to date other girls. And I can just remember being at a party and I was dating this girl from another school and just seeing her there and like just seeing the hurt in her eye of not understanding why I didn't want to date her, why she wasn't good enough for me, just that look in her face. And I was like, that's the first time I think I can remember dating somebody and like hurting them with my actions that I didn't really think about the consequences of what does it look like when you're, on a dance trip and you're making out with one girl in the back and the girl in the front seat is somebody you dated 2 months ago. And you're like, that there are consequences to your physical actions and your relationships that people, you could hurt people with how you do that.
Yeah. So flipping that around, do you remember the first person you helped?
Ooh.
That's a tough one, right?
Yeah. I want to say it goes back to probably scouting.
Yeah.
Early days. I can remember working at the Christmas tree lot. I can remember going door to door and selling things. I can remember, I guess, for my Eagle Scout project, you had to do a kind of a big project. And so what my dad and I did was we built these benches to go around my grade school. There were no benches there. So I can remember playing Cub Scout softball and all the games that went on there, and there was no place for the kids to sit. And the idea of just taking these telephone poles and sawing them and sinking them in the ground and then taking these boards and putting them on the top and then painting everything. And I just remember thinking like, how cool. Cause then, I would ride my bike all around the neighborhood. And at that point I was probably getting ready to drive soon. Just remember going by and seeing a game in progress and all the people there and then all these kids sitting on those benches and going, that's pretty cool. Like I like being able to give back to my community to help them. I hadn't really done it on a bigger scale before. And so those benches were there for a long time that I always had a real sense of pride in that, especially since I remember having such great memories of playing ball there as a kid too.
Was there anybody in your family or friends group who were fans of horror back then?
My mom was not. I remember that because I would read a lot of Stephen King, and even when she reads my stuff now, like she tends to not read it because she doesn't like horror, but she likes mystery and crime and thrillers. My grandmother was really cool, and she was a person I could talk to in my family. She lived to be 94, so she died when I was 25 or something, I think. And she and I could talk about anything. I put together a collection of my writing in high school, and it was just, oh my God, weird, stupid stuff you do in college. And I just remember her reading it and going, you have quite the active imagination. She was always very supportive. She looked at my writing in a way that nobody else in my family really did, as far as accepting me for who I was and what I was doing. I think beyond that, it was probably wouldn't be until like a teacher or fellow readers, probably not. I don't remember a lot of my friends reading Stephen King and stuff in high school. So probably would have been college when I first started talking to people who actually were excited about books and wanted to talk about them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Speaking of the high school stuff, so the first thing that you had mentioned with King was the Shining.
Yeah.
What did you like about The Shining?
I love the movie and I love the book, but I think how the movie does the book a bit of a disservice is it doesn't really portray the father in the depth in the way that the book does. In the book, there's a gesture from the father when you see he's possessed by the hotel, that he's not of his own right mind anymore, that he's losing his mind, that he's able to fight back and save his son and not kill him in a moment before like his destruction, right? And so I think that nuance, that level of depth, like I was really, it's also a young boy as like the protagonist, right? So I think we get a lot of that too. And so that's when you put yourself up, I think when you're young and you're reading, you don't have as much imagination to like, oh, can I read a book by a black woman? Can I, how does her story relate to mine? And like, turns out, well, we're all human, right? I can remember reading Toni Morrison's Beloved in college and being blown away by how powerful it was. And I think throughout college and my master's degree, really opened myself up to a wider range of writing. And I think that book at the time was just really the Shining, what it is, this power. And the idea of, it was one of the best, I think, haunted house, it's a haunted hotel stories. It had such power and presence that really felt like it had reach and breadth and depth to it. And I thought all the characters were really layered and deep. And I thought it to be a really immersive experience that really held my attention and really showed me what a book could do.
If you talk about The Shining and The Stand being like some of the first things that popped to mind from your teen years, can you name something else that really stands out strongly as impactful to you?
I think that event at the St. Louis Arch was pretty intense.
Yep. Yes.
I can remember going to see Jaws.
Was there any particular scene that jumps out to you?
I remember the tension of the opening and the music, and the teens are like skinny dipping, and you can see the woman swimming, and just kind of they didn't always show the blood and guts and gore stuff, but it was like implied. And so I remember that just being this fear of water, the sense of kind of innocence, vulnerability in a moment, and how this thing's going to take advantage of it, right? I just remember being, just really grabbing my attention. A lot of movies back then, Close Encounters, Star Wars, obviously, not just horror, but, really having an emotional relationship with film and books. And so I think that's part of it too, was I can remember reading The Dark Tower, it must have been later, but I can remember reading King's work and crying over a character dying in a book. And so I think for me, as I grew up and read more and more, having these really emotional, deep layered experiences in what I read, and that, the book putting you through the ringer, whether the horror wins or the horror loses, that the experience was worth the trip. Right. And so I think that even at a young age, while I think a lot of us enjoyed the jump scares and simplicity of, a Halloween or something, that nowadays I like a more nuanced and layered experience. I watch a lot more A24 films and stuff. And so I like a full-bodied horror experience, as opposed to like a kind of a classic slasher.
Okay.
I don't know if I got to your answer there. Sorry.
More or less.
Did you have any scary dreams as a teen or reoccurring nightmares?
I don't remember having scary dreams as a teen. I do. When I started to get into college, and I definitely was more experimental with my pursuits, having some pretty vivid experiences and things. But I had recurring dreams of going back to, God, I don't know if you guys had these all your life, but going back to grade school to have to take a test and being naked, or junior high, or I still have dreams about college, and I'm going to a final exam. And those are forever. I've had dreams of flying. Usually flying dreams were cool. Sometimes they were a little more weird or trippy. I can't really control my dreams, but I knew people who could. I knew a girl who could leave her body through like hypnosis, and like had like a thread connected between her brain, her head, and her floating body, and she could float around her house. I had a girlfriend who could control her dreams, and so I think it was a lot of things that started to open my mind up to a little bit, and then I get to college, and it's, a lot of experimentation, smoking weed and tripping, and hanging out with interesting people, and having all these experiences, and just really kind of reading more of the beats, reading more of the Tom Wolfe electric cooled acid test, just kind of really being curious, listening to the Doors, opening my mind up to a lot of things, reading a lot of philosophers, and then that all kind of was a gateway to a lot more curiosity and exploration.
When did you start having the dreams about flying?
For a long time. I always look forward to them because it's that sensation. I think if someone said, what's you had a superpower, what could you do? I think flying would be one of those things I'd want to do. But it also, I think I also like the idea of flying because I could go spy on people. I could go look into people's lives. And like sometimes, I wanted to go fly down the street to some girl's house and look in her window. Just because I thought she was, pretty, or I was curious what her life was about. There was a girl, Gretchen, in my high school who was really pretty, kind of this Marilyn Monroe personality. But I knew she had a troubled home life, and like her father was an alcoholic, and like I think he would hit her. And so like I remember having an English class with her and always being really intimidated by her beauty, but also really worried about her as an individual. And one of those things, you just wanted to go make sure she was okay. I don't know. I was often, I didn't quite have my mojo, everything figured together in high school. I was still pretty skinny. I dated and I had fun, but I just remember being intimidated by her. I just worried about her. So I think the thought of being able to fly around and like, I was always curious about people's lives, what they did when, they weren't in school performing this role of being the cheerleader or the jock or the choir or theater or whatever your archetype, stereotype was, to see people in good and bad situations. I was always just very curious. I think that's why I'm a writer too, is I'm curious about the human experience and human condition. That's why my minor is in psychology, because I was curious about why people do the things they do, why I love Mindhunter, stuff like that. Yeah.
Now, the real question is, did you have the dreams about flying before or after watching the 1980s cinema classic, The Explorers?
I think it was more, what was that superhero movie? Like, Believe in.
Oh, God. The show?
Greatest American Hero.
Yes. Not that, I mean, I go back to Christopher Reeves as Superman, but that show was kind of funny and quirky. And I think, now we have so much out there, superhero stuff, and so you see so many things on the big screen that people can do. But back then, I think it was a little more limited. Yeah. So,
yeah, the whole thing about Greatest American Hero was more like it was what would happen if, I don't want to say it necessarily a dork, but like a well-meaning person who had no special training or superpowers was thrust into this situation. What would happen.
Right, because every time he'd land, he'd like crash and tumble into the garbage can
to figure out how to land.
Wasn't very glamorous and athletic. No.
Let's see. Any time in your teens when you felt completely calm or safe or at bliss?
I can remember I loved to work on my tan in the summer, and so I can just remember lying at the pool and just being tan and just the sounds of people and laughter and the water. I'm always drawn to water and nature. That being really peaceful and safe. I had a bunch of friends that I was, good friends with. So my best friend, Matt, like I think I always felt safe in his presence, even though we got into a lot of trouble in high school and ran around and snuck out and did things. But I think I know what you're looking for. And I think I had an experience as an adult, but not as a teen, that was like this kind of transcendental moment. But
all right. Well, if we're bouncing around plenty, you want to go ahead and talk about it now?
Sure. Just that when my family drove cross country, we were at the Painted Desert. Okay. And we walked down into the Painted Desert, and it was really quiet. And so I turned to my wife and kids. I said, "Hey, everybody, be quiet. Let's see if we just be quiet for a second. I want to hear something." And then and everybody started talking. And then all I could hear was nothing, like nothing at all. Like not a car, not an airplane, nothing. And in that moment, I held three simultaneous feelings and beliefs. One, I thought I was dead, because it was this weird context of when there's absolutely no sound. It felt like something had happened. Another experience in that same moment, it also felt like a very holy kind of spiritual moment, that I felt very close to something godlike, holy in that moment, really pure and blissful and just really like golden almost, it was this really pure moment. And then the third feeling I felt at the same time was that I thought the Matrix had been broken. That like something, like there was a glitch and that we, every now and then I have these little moments where I'm like, I feel like I'm in a virtual reality that's not real. I see weird things that make me go, that can't be real, right? I don't know if you guys remember the story. There was like a billboard in the middle of the country, and it was like a digital billboard, and it was a really foggy night, and the people, the community looked up and they saw in the sky like error 404 in really big letters. And they thought that like it was the Matrix and it was broken. And it was just a billboard that was hidden in the sky, but kind of a War of the Worlds thing. But so that's what that moment was. I've had other weird moments, usually altered with chemicals, but I can remember having these vivid hallucinations and dreams where I was in the presence. It was really weird. It was like, do you remember the X-Files episode where it was this like African guy, and he could shapeshift and change like into a snake and hide in small spaces?
Yes.
And so I'm in this dream, and I'm back in college, and I'm in this room, and I'm talking to Mulder and Scully, and it's in the art lab, and this guy walks in, this African shape-shifting snake guy, and I remember this feeling of existential dread of it, and like I felt like he was the devil. He was this powerful dark presence. And then shortly after, this guy walked in, kind of long, scraggly hair, looked kind of homeless, and I felt immediately that it was Christ. It was this weird experience, and I felt in that moment like I was blessed, and I was okay. He was going to protect me. It was just this alternating moments of extreme power of good and evil that I've seen every now and then in some of my dreams and visions and things. That just taps into my belief in there's things out there way bigger than us that we don't. I wouldn't say I'm a religious man, but I think I'm a spiritual person. And I've seen a lot of weird things. I've had time rewound. I've left my body. I've seen weird things, and just make me feel like there's stuff out there. And so I think I find these little pockets of moments. I remember tripping one time in my 20s and just with this girl and feeling like we were floating on these clouds and just like in this perfect, blissful, like almost ethereal outside our bodies kind of experience. But drugs will do that to you.
Yes.
Yes, they will.
Yeah. I don't know if that's what you're looking for. Sorry.
I think the answer to the question was in there somewhere.
Yeah. That does fall into blissful experiences, yes.
Yeah, for sure. I think these are some of the most interesting questions I've ever been asked. So I'm like, probing. Yeah. Usually it's like, wow, what's your favorite Stephen King book? So you guys are really keeping me on my toes.
That's the idea. All right, so I think that covered all the teenage stuff. For adult years, you had mentioned Toni Morrison's The Beloved. What'd you like about that?
There are a couple things I love about that book. I think it's one of me going into the expectation that even as an adult in my 40s, I still had some limited understanding of the human experience. In that, I think I went into that class thinking, "Oh, what do I and a black woman, middle-aged black woman, have in common? Like, what are we going to share?" And so I think going through her life, I'm like, "Oh, quite a bit actually." And so I think somewhere along the way between college and my MFA and being an adult, I realized that there were I could learn from everybody. That I think I often write straight white men of about my age in my stories, but I've worked hard to include more diversity as secondary characters. My whole thought on writing diversity is that I'm not going to speak for something I'm not, but I want to include a wider range of people. Running Gamut magazine, running Dark House Press, I started to get exposed to more writers, men and women, LGBTQ, writers from all over the world, different cultures, and that really opened my eyes to mythology that's not all the same old Greco-Roman Western mythology, and lore and legend and creatures that are, indicative of whether it's Africa or Australia or China or Nordic countries or Polish legends, and so I think Toni Morrison's Beloved was one of the first books that really kind of opened my eyes to experiences of people that were pretty different from me, but at the same time were also very similar to me. And so I think it really helped me to grow as a writer and a human being, that book. Okay.
I understand that completely. There's part of my background. I think I mentioned earlier in the call that the book I wrote, A Guide to the Recovery Toolbox. I've had a couple years of therapy and many years in a 12-step program. And one of the first things that you learn in recovery is the phrase, don't compare, identify. Mm-hmm. And what that means is that if you look for the things that make us different, you're going to distance yourself from that other individual and potentially cut off the things that you could have learned from them. Whereas if you look for identify the things that you have in common, that brings you closer to the other person and opens you up to what you potentially could learn from that person.
Yeah, I agree. I'm also 20 years sober myself, so I understand that. And, I think when I teach in my classes, one of the things I talk about is empathy and sympathy, and that we have to get your audience to care about the characters, whatever the characters are, whatever they're going through. Doesn't matter what bad things you do to, or good things, whatever you do to them that has a profound effect on them. If we don't care first, it doesn't matter. And that the opposite of love is not hate. the opposite of love is apathy. It's not feeling anything at all. In fact, if you truly want to hate something, you have to probably first love it. And I'm not talking about like, oh, I hate having mushrooms on my pizza. I'm talking about hating somebody who betrayed you and slept with your brother and broke your heart, and that this love turns into betrayal, turns into hatred because of the pain that they inflicted upon you, right? Or whatever it is that that it's a complex set of emotions that we go through. I think that's part of my, my psychology and my undergrad studies that really helped me to dig deeper into the abnormal in psychology, the sexual, the full human experience. And I tried to work that into my writing, body, mind, and soul. That body is entertainment. Turn the page, great setting and sensory detail that you could just read it for entertainment. That soul is the emotion. The second level is to get not just entertained, but now get you to feel something. Whatever I'm trying to do, make you laugh, make you cry, turn you on, scare you, whatever I'm trying to do. Can we have an emotional connection? And then the third thing being intellectually, can I stimulate your brain? Can I blow your mind? Can I do something that you're going to put down the story and still be thinking about it a week later? If I can do all three things, as I'm also writing my hybrid work, fantasy, sci-fi, horror, my blend of writing, I'm trying to do something that I think would be worth the trip and be a deep, interesting, intense experience that, will have a profound effect on you if I do everything right.
Right. Focusing on things that had the profound emotional response for you, because at least on for what we're covering, we found that is even more important than the intellectual side. But earlier when we were talking about other things that you had read or watched or what have you in your adult life, like there was this very long list of things that you were rattling off. But like if I were to ask you, what are the first three that come to mind? Usually there's an emotional reason for that. Like, could you name what those are?
There are two books that immediately pop into my mind, especially when it comes to horror. One is American Psycho by Bret Easton Ellis. And I think my friend was reading the book and I was freelancing. I can't remember, I was at Sears or something. And he said, "Oh, I think you'll like this book." And he gave it to me. And I'm like, why would you think I would like this book? Because this book's horrible. I remember it really super intense. And there's the rat scene. I don't know if you remember the rat scene. It's the only time I've ever gagged while reading a book. And it was such a long, layered, profound experience. I didn't like the movie because I thought it was silly until I watched it with a new set of eyes. And recently with my son, who's now 20, so we can watch these movies together now. Nice. And I thought it was actually a pretty profound movie. That book was one that I found to be really, really intense and complex. I think another one was Jack Ketchum's The Girl Next Door. Yeah. And that's one I come back to as I put it on my probably top 5 horror novels of all time, because it was such a intense experience of feeling really complicit that I felt that I don't need to go read that book again. I don't need to rewatch Requiem for a Dream. There's some things, that I go through it and I'm like, okay, I'm glad I did that, but I don't want to experience that again. I felt so close to it that I felt even just witnessing it, I was keeping it alive and putting it into existence. And that it just was really a profound, powerful horror experience. It's also based on a true story.
Yeah, that's really one of the most effective parts of The Girl Next Door is the fact that it's based on true facts. Gut-wrenching.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that really was one of those things that I'm like, part of the reason I read extreme horror or watch extreme horror is I'm trying to figure out the line. Where do I draw the line in the sand? How far am I willing to go, and where am I going to stop? And so sometimes I would read these books or watch these movies. I remember watching Martyrs and other things. Like I don't like excessive gore because I think a lot of times it's just too much. At some point I just check out. So purposeful violence and gore can work. Yeah. But I can remember watching these movies and reading these books and things, and if it's worth the trip, if it's worth the experience, the end of the movie Mother, which I saw it in theaters, and I was like, I hated it because it made me feel very uncomfortable. And what I realized later is that's exactly what he wanted.
That's kind of the point. Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. So I actually came back around and thought it was quite brilliant.
Going back to American Psycho for a minute, you mentioned about being intense and complex. Like, talking about your emotional reaction to it, what emotions were intense or complex?
I think for me, it's this idea of you're looking at this guy and you're getting caught up in what you at first think is kind of this silly stuff, like the business cards and the font and the color of the white on the stock, and it's just like ridiculous. And there's this shallowness to his entire existence that kind of hangs over the whole book. That if you could easily write it off as not being important, but to me, I think it's crucial to that book having its power to see the way he's able to check out, to not care. So I think it's this shallowness on the surface, but then this brutality right underneath it. That this guy could be right next door to you. That he's the guy wearing the suit on the L train, or that you see walking the halls, that has these hidden secrets, these deep desires to rape and murder and bludgeon and just this really dark desires that, to me, I don't get as scared by creatures, monsters and vampires and demons and werewolves, because I don't believe in a lot of that. Although I could talk about demons and things. I've seen too many weird things about spirits and presences, but like werewolves, it doesn't really scare me. I mean, you could jump scare and you go, it's a cool creature, but to me, it's really man as a scary creature next door. That's the thing that actually is probably the biggest risk to you. That's right next door. There's this meme bounced around Facebook right now about women in the woods and bears and men, how they'd rather run into a bear because most likely the bear, they could deal with that, whereas men are the more dangerous creature, or you may not think they're dangerous. That's how they lure you in, right? So I think it's this idea for me is that a lot of the realistic horror is the stuff that really gets to me because I believe it's more possible. I believe there are people out there that are sociopaths and psychopaths, and that you might not recognize it in them.
Immortal words of Bartholomew Moussier. I believe the real monsters are the human being.
Exactly.
Not a poutini weenie.
A second ago, you mentioned about what's just below the surface, what's just next door. Was that kind of tying into Girl Next Door? Is that what you got out of?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think in film it's probably Texas Chainsaw Massacre too, right? The protagonist, you feel like he's also kind of participating in this, right? Yeah. He knows what's going on. He sees things and he's not doing anything about it because there's a part of him that doesn't want to believe it's really happening, and 2 is also curious,
and 3 is also a little bit of peer pressure from like he's at that age where he wants to fit in, he wants to be cool and be accepted by his peers. So there's also that. But you're right, like you can see there's a duality in the character, because like he doesn't want this to happen to this poor girl, especially because he's like the closest one to her that actually talks to her, so they're friends.
Right.
But at the same time, he doesn't want to. I guess he wants the acceptance of his peers. It's that peer pressure.
Humanity. I don't know what to say about us.
There's a lot you could say about.
We should be evolving. We should be doing so much better than where we are.
You're right.
Right.
We're getting there.
Although I will say, I do think I've said this before. I think I carry around this little nugget of brutality, of violence in me, in case I ever need it. And I don't know if that's just me as Richard, or me as a man, or me as a human being. I don't know how many other people feel the same way, but it goes back to I can remember being on a bus going to a Navy pier with my wife, and there were these drunk veterans on the bus, and they were harassing this family of this quiet little Chinese family, and they were, first they were just saying stupid things, and you're like, all right, and everyone's watching, everybody's tolerating it, and then they call them some really bad slurs, and I'm like, all right, that's it. And so I get up and I walk on. I'm a pacifist. I don't like violence because violence begets violence, and it's only going to get worse until someone doesn't get up. And so I think part of my fear is that I don't want to be in a situation where I step in and then beat somebody to death. But at this moment, I walked over and I said, hey, enough. Stop harassing these guys. Shut up. And leave them alone. And then I walked back and sat down, and they were like grumbling. I thought, okay, hopefully that's it. I'm, I don't know, 6'2", 220. I'm a big guy, but I'm not, huge. I'm not the Rock here. So I sit back down, and then they pick it up again. And then it's getting even worse. And then they're in their face. I can see this little lady who's like in tears. And I'm like, okay, fuck it, here we go. And so I walk over and I pull the ding on the bus because I can see the bus driver, and I could tell she's not going to do anything. But I don't know what she would do. These guys are, my size. And so I pull the ding on the bell, and then I'm like, you guys are getting off. And the guy's like, fuck, I am. And so I grab the biggest guy by his collar, and I just move him off the bus. I move him down, and I he won't let go of the bar, and I'm pounding on his hand until he lets go, and I throw him through the doors off the bus, and then I turn to his buddy, and his buddy scampers out, and they go off the bus, and then the door closes, and we take off, and everybody's applauding, and I'm like getting ready to throw up. I'm like, how far is this going to have to go? What do I have to do to stop this? Should I step in? Why shouldn't I step? Somebody has to step up, and people often don't. But the whole time I'm just like riddled with nerves, and like I don't like that kind of confrontation because I'm like, where are we going to go with this?
Yeah.
because that's a trauma. You defend yourself, and then
where's it end?
So when I say I carry this little nugget of hate and violence in me, it's just there in case I have to ever protect like my wife or my daughter or my son or something from something out in the world. That I have to be prepared to go, whole hog, full Mati. And I don't want to, but I think there's a part of me I carry around. I've carried that around forever.
You had a little Mr. Nobody moment, except less pistol whippings and near fatal.
Yeah, exactly. Do you guys feel the same way? Do you carry that too, or you try to avoid that?
I don't know. I think so. Like maybe just preparedness. There's a little bit of me that always wants to make sure that if it does have to come to that, I'm ready for it. But having not actually experienced that yet in my life, I would probably just chicken out and run away.
Yeah.
I think my take on it is that I'm capable of taking it to that degree if I need to, but and if you asked me this question 20 years ago, probably would have been a much stronger yes. But I think at this point in my life, I've learned enough other ways of dealing with situations that I don't know that I would necessarily resort straight to a violent one.
Yeah, it's the last resort. Yeah. What's the saying? It's the last resort of a base mind or something, of a reduced violence. Yeah.
What that is reminding me of, I think I can't remember what movie it is, but it's the one that's got Al Pacino and Keanu Reeves, and he says something about rage is the last fig leaf.
Yeah.
Which the rest of the movie was okay, but when I heard that line, I loved it because that was so perfect.
Devil's advocate.
That's what it was. But I understand what you're saying because. Try to make this a short story because it's a little bit of a long one, but there was a time about maybe 10, 15 years ago. It was Christmas Day. I was going over to my grandmother's house for Christmas dinner with some other relatives that were going to be there. The place I was living at the time, I had to drive out of the apartment complex, come down a road to another main road, but I couldn't make a left turn there. I had to make a right turn and then make a U-turn to come back. And as I was pulling up to the end of this road, it had just started raining. Right across the street from me, I could see there was a kid sitting at a bus stop. I'm like, that sucks. And there was no shelter. It was just the bench. I was like, that sucks, sitting at the bus stop raining on Christmas Day. So I do the U-turn, decide to pull over and say, hey, where are you going? Turns out it's in the direction that I'm going. I'm like, hop in. Take him he's going to his mother's house for Christmas dinner. She's in some little trailer park. I pull into the trailer park, drop him off. As I'm leaving, it's on another main road. And so it's like 3 lanes in each direction with a divider, like a median in the middle. And there's a guy in front of me who's not going and not going and not going. And finally I honk at him like a little tap, boop, and he flips me off. I'm like, really, on Christmas Day? Wow. And I realized to myself what's going on is he wants to make a right turn just like I do, but he wants to then get into the left lane to make a left turn. But the left turn, is like blocks away. So this is just some asshole who either doesn't know how to merge or doesn't want to. He wants to make a wide right turn.
Nobody knows how to zipper anymore.
Right. So I'm just like, all right, I'm chill, whatever. And so we go through this process. Whatever car was coming that was in the far left lane comes, he goes, I go, I pass him and get in front of him. And there are a couple different places that he could have turned left, but it turns out that he's not turning left at any of those. He's coming up to the next intersection where there's a light, which is where I was also making a left turn.
Yeah.
And as it turns out, I end up being in front of him at the red light, waiting to make the left turn. And the light turns green, and I think to myself for a second about going, and I think, you know what? I'm just going to stay here and see what he does.
Right.
Fate.
Is he going to honk at me? Because if he does, I'm going to flip him off, and we're going to be even.
Right.
He doesn't. He just sits there and he eats it. He knows what happened.
Nice.
Light turns yellow. I still wait. Wait. Finally, I go, and he stays there at the red light.
Yeah. And
I get to my grandmother's house. The rest of the relatives were there, and I kind of tell them the story and joke about how because I had picked up the kid and took him to his mother's house, I kind of felt like I had karma to burn.
Yeah. That's great. Right. Karma to burn. Like I did a good thing. I'm allowed to be an asshole once.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's really where I was going with this, is that phrase, karma to burn, that I've done enough good things in life Where if I need to be an asshole, I'm okay with being an asshole because I know that in the whole mix, I come out good.
Yeah. That's good stuff.
So if it needed to come to violence, I'm okay with that. I don't necessarily want it to. There's other things I'm going to try.
You have a credit of 1.5 violent things.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So the next two questions I'm going to ask, they could be the same answer or they could be two different answers, but they cover not just horror, but any genre and your entire life, not just any one section. What movie would you say you've watched more times than any other?
I'm probably going to say Blade Runner. I think that's my favorite movie of all time.
It's a classic. Vangelis.
Yeah, I love it. It's got the kind of noir tones to it. I like the humanity, the inhumanity. It's visually stunning. It's a moving story, I think. What is it to be human? I mean, I've watched Hereditary quite a few times too, but I think I just saw it on IMAX with my son, and he hadn't seen it on the big screen before. And I think I've seen that 5 times now, or something like that. But no, it's probably something that's really ridiculous, like Rango or something that we watch every Christmas for laughs.
Yeah.
Tend to come back to the funny stuff, but I mean, I think even as Blade Runner 2049 wasn't bad, but I think I don't know. There's probably some themes in Blade Runner that speak to me. The Voight Comp test and what it means to be human and all the weird stuff with AI now. But yeah, probably one of those.
Okay. And again, because it may or may not be the same movie, would you say that is your favorite movie, or would you pick something else?
Yeah. No, when I make lists, and I usually say Blade Runner. I think. So I think for me, Blade Runner, I'm often curious. I mentioned my minor in psych and the stories I write, that the psychology behind why we do the things we do. And so I think that's a great question to ask. What does it mean to be human? Especially now as we're dealing with AI and things, things are weird. I find that movie to be just visually stunning. And I remember the first time I finally got to see it on the big screen, what a powerful experience. That's also what I like about Hereditary. The music and the score and the cinematography is just brilliant, really well done. Look, it's original. There's a bit of humor worked in there with the darker stuff, and then how you take the end of Blade Runner. You're like, okay, he's running away with Rachel, and there's always a question. Is he a replicant? People say no, he's not, or he's an advanced version, whatever. And there's all this theory on it. So I like a little bit of a mind game too. So I think those are two movies that I both would give 10 out of 10. I'll probably give Blade Runner the nod just for rewatch value. I mean, it's easy to I could fall into Pee-wee anytime it comes on, or Rango for sure, because it's easy to fall into that and have a good laugh. But I think I think it's a complex, layered, nuanced experience is what I'm looking for. And so push comes to shove, it's going to be Blade Runner for me, I think.
Okay. This would normally be the spot where we talk about, whatever has come up multiple times in the interview. And it's funny that you touched on it right there, because what I was going to say is I'm really glad that we talked about Blade Runner, because when you said what it means to be human, that really is a great summary for the things that have been coming up multiple times. We talked about nature and cosmic horror, which, Vertigo from the Waves in Hawaii, Bambi's Mom in the Forest Fire, Annihilation.
Yeah.
The stuff with American Psycho and The Girl Next Door, it's, what's just below the surface or just next door. That also kind of ties in with cosmic horror because it's what's on the other side of whatever the barrier is.
Right.
I would say there's a minor interest in open water, Jaws, Hawaii, lying near the pool. You mentioned the phrase drawn to water, which also has a boundary. And worrying about what's on the other side.
Also, there's the movie Open Water.
Yeah,
that too. You also have used the phrase, experience. Is it worth the trip? And that ties into what it means to be human as well, which also interesting ties in with the Joseph Campbell thing that I brought up earlier, which is a lot of what he did. He said, there are these different religions and mythologies all over the world that have all these commonalities across time and distance. And comparative religion often will look at them and say, what makes them different? He looked at them and said, why are these things the same? Why are these similarities? Yeah. And if we can figure out why they're the same, he was thinking maybe there's something about the experience of what it means to be human that is being filtered through our dreams and our experiences. And if we can figure out what our needs are and what our values are and all these different things, maybe we can find a better way of handling them in a more direct manner that is healthier for the world and for us.
Yeah, yeah. And that's something I've been doing the last couple of years, say the last 3-5 years, is I've been writing more hope punk. So I've been putting more hope into my work. I think exactly for what you're talking about. It's in my book Incarnate that is coming out later this year, the idea of, sin eaters and absolution on your deathbed, and then flipping that into not absolution but consequence, right? And so for myself, I believe in a lot of different things, reincarnation. I can't believe we're the only life in the universe. What happens after we die? Aliens, other entities, like, can we evolve? So I'm fascinated by all these things, and so that's often what goes into my work is what's beyond. That's why I'm fascinated by liminal spaces and the uncanny and cosmic core, all these things that I try to talk to universal truth and things that we all feel, and then put that into a unique situation that you might not have been in before. I'm trying to find this new idea, this kind of holistic new age horror novel that I'm working on, because I feel like there's stuff around us all the time and that we just don't see it. And so if we could change our vibration, that we could see, whether it's, I've woken up to, shadowy things standing over my bed, I've rewound time, I've, like a thing in the desert, I've hallucinated things, I've all these experiences of good and evil, the end of a dark song, if you know what I'm talking about, right? That kind of holy experience at the end there. Mm-hmm. What's around us on different levels, good and bad, angels and demons, aliens, creatures, all these things that I feel like there's so much out there we don't understand, that we only use a portion of our brain, or we can't use our brain to the full ability to see the things that are there. And there may be reasons why we don't see those things. That it's not good for us, that seeing it would break our minds, or that knowing that if you're constantly surrounded by death and shadow and ghost and alien creatures and things that you don't understand, might be crippling. So that's what I'm trying to work on now and I tap into those kinds of subjects. I just wrote my first kind of biblically accurate angel story. If you've seen biblically accurate angels, they're freaky. And so that was
Chris's favorite topics.
You're not afraid.
Yeah. So I'm going down these weird rabbit holes of trying to focus on things that kind of on the edge of our experience and things beyond what we really understand or could believe and what might be out there, right? That probably goes back to the X-Files and so many other things. Yeah.
Yeah, I like that aspect of, the desire to want to know, but what if, the knowing is unknown for your own benefit? Like,
right.
You're not supposed to know.
Yeah.
You said something a minute ago that I thought was interesting. So my next question was initially going to be pointing out what you said about being interested in why people do the things that they do, and talking about psychological interests, and I was going to ask why it is that you're interested in that. However, something you just said a minute ago about it's on the other side of being human, the cosmic horror and different stuff about being inhuman, and it made me wonder, is it so much that you're interested in what makes us human from a psychological standpoint, or is that just like a leapfrog to get to the things that, like, being an interest in what makes I don't know, I wanted to say what makes us inhuman, but I don't necessarily mean us in terms of. Do you remember what sparked your interest in psychology?
I think it's all those things. It's partly to understand how. One, so for my own knowledge, just out of curiosity, I think that's part of it. Mm. Another part is that I think I want to help people to be better. And so often in my classes, in my teaching, helping a writer to have those aha moments, those epiphanies, to have them put it all together, to tell stories the way they want to in a way that's compelling. Like, their success is probably the next best thing to my own success, sometimes maybe more. And so partly it's curiosity, partly is that I want to help other people to evolve, to find their dreams and to make things come true. And then partly it's because I want to see what else is out there beyond us. Can we go beyond what we are now and find some sort of higher calling, some sort of utopia, some sort of evolution that would make things better? I'm not too confident that we will get there before we destroy this planet, but I'm still hoping.
It's possible. We might. Maybe. Just barely.
Maybe, yeah. So I think it's all three of those things, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. The interesting question then is the follow-up, why horror? Because, and the reason I say it's interesting is because usually what I say is, why horror? Couldn't you examine those topics in other genres?
Right.
And the funny thing is, most of the guests that we've talked about, the answer has been no, you can't really talk about it too much in other genres. But particularly, I mean, curiosity and the desire to help other people be better. That one really is why horror, because I think you could talk about those in other genres.
Yeah. I think to me the heart of horror is this duality, this relationship between the unknown and the known. I call the unknown like the terror, the dread. It's the clues, the hints, part of the puzzle, a weird thing, the secrets, the things we haven't fully discovered, and that's the terror, the emotion, the dread, the tension. And then the release is going to be the horror realized. So it's dropping the veil, it's showing the thing, it's a horror come home to roost. It's the horror realized, it's the violence, it's the event, the climax of it happening. So I think in horror, what it does really well, aside from like atmosphere, mood, and tone, and immersion that's important to horror, is this battle back and forth between unknown and known, and the tension between those two things, and what happens on the road to discovery to find out what it is, and then what you do once you get there. Sometimes you get there, you discover what it is, and you can find a way to kill it. You just need a silver bullet. You just need a cross. Other times you discover it, you see it, and you go, oh shit, I shouldn't have gotten its gaze on me, so now it's too late, and I'm doomed. And then everything in between. So I like to explore in those places, the full human condition in all these weird, uncanny, cosmic, or liminal spaces to explore what might be out there beyond us.
How does that help us be better people?
I think in a number of ways. I think one is one, striving to be better, and two is understanding your place. And I think when you understand that things are finite, that you only have so much time, or you only have so much time with this life, you might appreciate the time you have, the people you have, and when you understand what it looks like when it's bad, that you appreciate it when it's good. That without the dark, could you really truly appreciate the light? I don't think so. I know there's a bigger contrast. It's like if you've always had money, do you really appreciate money? I think if you're poor and you work your way towards money, I think you probably tend to appreciate it more once you get there. I think it's the same thing in all the experiences across horror. Is often what's the line? The devil said the greatest trick he ever pulled was to make us think he didn't exist, right?
Something like that.
There are a lot of really weird, dark, horrible things out there, and I think it helps. Often when I write about these things, it's sometimes the horror wins, and it's like, you shouldn't have gone and done this thing. You shouldn't have gone into that cave. You shouldn't have angered the demon or cast that spell or done that ritual. Other times it's wrong place, wrong time, and then other times it's still, hey man, you survived this thing, whether it was your own fault or not, and maybe now you could be a little more appreciative of what you have, that you dodged a bullet here, that you see this horrible thing happen. I think back to my childhood and St. Louis Arch and all these things I've seen, and I'm like grateful for what I have and appreciative of those around me. It's like you ride the roller coaster and you get off, and you're like, you don't really want to die, but you want to flirt with death, and you want to have this intense experience. But most of us want to come out the other side, and then go on to do other things. So I think horror is a great way to kind of a fairly safe place to experience these things without actually having to go through it.
Fair enough. I think that's a really good summary of everything that we've talked about. I guess as a last question, is there anything that you've thought of that you think is relevant that you didn't get a chance to say? Maybe you thought of something earlier in the call and conversation took a left turn?
Man, no, this has been an intense conversation.
Yes.
I appreciate it. No, I think the only thing we've really covered a lot of like what I'm trying to do and what I'm drawn to, and I think the only thing I might end with is just that I know a lot of people out there are struggling to figure out if you're a writer or whatever art you are, even as a human being, what you're doing. I just want to encourage people to do their own thing, to figure out who they are. That's the first bit of advice. Often people say, what's one bit of advice you give to any writer? Figure out who you are and your voice and like what you're trying to do. Then do that thing, that weird thing that makes you uncomfortable, that makes you feel vulnerable, that, is uniquely you. Keep doing that thing. That's what I want to read as an editor and a publisher. And as a writer, that's what I'm trying to do for myself. So part of that journey of self-discovery is understanding where you come from, all the things we talked about today, and what are your inspirations, what you read as a kid. The first assignment I give in my short story mechanics class is give me your top 5 or top 10, depending, top 5 books, top 5 authors, top 5 movies, top 5 TV shows. Sometimes I'll say top 5 bands or albums.
Yeah.
and then look at those and go, where are the commonalities? What are the things that cross over all of it that makes the recurring themes that you're seeing? That might be something that you should write because it speaks to what you like to ingest. Now, there might be, then also look at the anomalies, look at the things that stand out, the weirdness, like you said, here's all these dark, psychological, heavy experiences, and then one of your favorite movies is Rango. You're like, what's that all about? It's like, well, you need some humor, we need some lightness to break up the density of the darkness, because otherwise it can be crushing sometimes. So
levity is necessary.
I think that's the only thing I really want. Yeah, is that just, figure out who you are and then be yourself and then have no regrets and do the things you want to do and don't apologize and, push hard to bring whatever you can that's unique to your stories, whether it's, male, female, LGBTQ, culture, where you live in the world, your experiences, whatever, because that's what I like. And then opening up, with Gambit and Dark House Press, I got to read work from all over the world, and I started to see different stories and different points of views and experiences and culture and lore and politics and emotion and everything that really makes it for a different vampire story from Germany versus Africa versus Australia versus Japan, right? And so I want to see what each author is doing that's uniquely them. And then if you could speak to universal truth and then find a way to connect with your readers, then you have a really good chance, I think, of succeeding and having a profound experience with your readers.
I don't know if this is intentional or not, and maybe you come from a different program, but you said almost verbatim a few words from the closing of one of the programs that I attend. But you diverted instead of saying the very last words, which are learning to love the self.
There you go. Not intentional, but maybe subconsciously. Because I really think you're right. You hit the nail on the head there, right on the nose, that you can't give what you can't spare, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah. Well, I think it was connected to what we said a few minutes ago about learning to love the self, and it was the original topic was more of the importance of being able to figure out who you are and what makes you special, and being true to that.
Yes.
Than diverting from it.
Yes, exactly. And I think at the beginning we just ape. We're gonna imitate. Because that's how we start. We're like, oh, I read a lot of King. I'll write like King. Like I love Chuck Palahniuk. I can't write like Chuck, but there are people who have influenced my voice. And then, but I unless I'm going to sit down and copy it word for word, I'm not going to write like Jeff Vandermeer or Stephen Graham Jones or Brian Evanson. I'm just going to absorb it and then have a little distance and then use that as source material to then help me do the weird.
It's funny that you say that, because if I remember correctly, I think it was Brian Keene when we interviewed him. He mentioned being in high school, and he did rewrite somebody else's book. I want to say it was even a King.
I think it was, yeah. I remember that. That was like
he rewrote it word for word, just to have the understanding of the experience of that.
Yeah,
but like you say, you've then got to find your own voice, and it's not the same thing, but it can be a step on that journey.
Yeah, no, and I know people who type out other people's work, and I think that's a different thing, But when you're that close to it, you're typing it, and you're word for word, you're that close to it, you really get a sense of what the author was trying to do. I think that's a fun experience, but Brian's not going to go publish that then. It's
right.
When I edited Stephen Graham Jones' collection after the People Lights have gone off, I read that as close as anything I've ever read and edited. And I really had a strong sense of who Stephen was as a human being and writer by being that close to it on a word by word, sentence by sentence, paragraph by paragraph level that you don't normally get when you're just reading as a reader. So right. I think you can definitely learn from that and pick up syntax and flow and lyricism and character and different traits of how different people write. And then I want you to push that to the side and do your own thing, right? You just kind of funnel it in and see how that inspires you.
You have to learn the rules enough that you can forget about the rules.
Yeah, exactly.
I like that.
Yeah.
Well, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Before we wrap up, do you want to share again what you're currently working on?
Sure. Thanks. It's been a great conversation. Pretty deep. Awesome. I appreciate really thoughtful, excellent questions. Mostly just my book Incarnate coming out in September. It's an Arctic horror sin eater book. I think it's some of my best work to date. I comped it to kind of John Langan's The Fisherman meets Stephen Graham Jones' The Only Good Indian.
Oh God! Reddit horror lit is going to have a field day with that. I don't know if you follow that, but there's a love hate between both of those books on that subreddit.
Yeah, and that's okay. That's okay. Love and the hate, and a bit of the Giver folded in. So it's kind of this this interesting mix of, if you like Arctic horror and the terror and the thing, that's part of it. Mm-hmm. but also kind of the nature as danger, and then there's a tear in reality through which monsters are coming through, and this guy is absolving people of their sins and birthing creatures into existence to battle them and to send them through. So he has to, by nature, work with really bad people, because you can't can't send a puppy dog to fight a kaiju, can't take a knife to a gunfight. So he has to absolve the sins of really bad people and then send those creatures, you have to birth them into existence, and then obviously things are going to escalate. Yeah, it's a really fun book, a wild ride, and if I've done my job right, hopefully it should be a moving experience.
Yeah, cool. We're talking about controversial things that are going to piss people off. I might say it sounds like what Night Country should have been. No, it sounds like it's in that same vein. I like it.
Awesome.
That's interesting.
I'll take it. Sure.
Well, again, thank you very much. And thank you to anybody out there listening. Please do come visit us at horrormakesushappy.com. We'll have links to Mr. Thomas's stuff, social media pages, whatever that he wants to share with us, and you can catch him there. And if nothing else, tell a friend.